Or a little girl helps a billionaire CEO fix his Mustang when he sees the ring on his finger. I was 9 when I fixed his car on the side of an empty road, but it wasn't the engine that stunned him. It was the ruby ring on my finger. The same one he gave to his sister 15 years ago. A sister he thought was dead. A sister who was me. If that one sentence made your heart pause, don't go anywhere. A ring that shouldn't exist. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across County Road 16 as Emily Collins trudged home from school, her worn backpack thudding softly against her back. At just 9 years old, she had the quiet, serious look of someone who'd learned to survive more than just childhood. She hummed to herself and kicked at gravel until a sleek black Mustang caught her eye. Hood up. Beside it stood a man in a tailored suit, pacing, frustrated, phone pressed to his ear. He didn't belong here, not in this rural stretch of upstate New York. Emily paused. Something about the car's hiss, the faint smell of syrupy coolant, it all clicked in her mind like a puzzle she knew how to solve. "Excuse me, mister," she called out. "Need help?" Jack Reynolds turned, brows lifting at the sight of the little girl, a man used to making billion-dollar deals with steely confidence, now stranded, overheating, and being offered help by a child with grease-stained fingers. But what he didn't know, not yet, was that she held more than the answer to his car problem. He held the key to a secret buried for 15 years. And it all started with a single impossible thing. A ruby ring on her finger, wrapped in thread to make it fit. And the moment Jack saw it, the past he'd buried came screaming back. Here is Chapter 1, The Girl with the Ruby Ring. The wind danced around the trees lining County Road 16, carrying the crisp scent of fall and the faint hum of tires on gravel. 9-year-old Emily Collins didn't notice the golden leaves spiraling at her feet. Her focus was on the quiet hum of an engine dying. She spotted the black Mustang GT just ahead, sleek, foreign, and glaringly out of place on this rural road. Hood open, steam rising, and pacing in front of it was a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine ad. Charcoal suit, polished shoes, impatience radiating from every step. He slowed, not out of fear, but curiosity. "But I don't care what meeting I'm missing," he barked into a phone. "It's a damn Mustang, not a spaceship. Just get someone out here." He noticed her then. Emily stopped a few feet from the car. "Excuse me, mister," she called. "Need help?" The man blinked, first in surprise, then with something else. Dismissal? No. Confusion. I'm fine," he said. But his tone wasn't convincing. Emily took a slow step closer, eyeing the puddle forming beneath the car. "That smell. Kind of sweet, like syrup? You're leaking coolant. It's probably the radiator hose." The man's eyebrows rose. "You know about cars?" "My uncle's a mechanic," she said, already swinging her backpack around. "I help him in the shop after school." The man crossed his arms. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but this is a high-performance Mustang GT," she finished, crouching beside the front tire. "Yeah, I noticed. Just means the parts cost more. Doesn't mean it doesn't leak like any other car." That earned a short laugh. "Jack Reynolds," he said, offering a hand after a pause. "Emily," she replied, gripping his palm firmly. "Emily Collins." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped roll. Unfolded, it revealed duct tape, a flashlight, 2 hose clamps, and a packet of cooling system sealer. Jack crouched beside her, the expensive fabric of his suit brushing the dirt. "You carry this around?" Emily shrugged. "Uncle Matthew says knowing how to fix something is better than waiting around for someone else to do it." "Smart uncle." "He is," she said, then pointed. "See that crack? That's your leak." Together they patched the hose. Jack watched in fascinated silence as Emily worked with quiet precision. She explained every step, her tone matter-of-fact, her hand steady. When they were done, Jack stood and offered her a water bottle. "You're kind of amazing, you know that?" Emily shrugged again. "I just pay attention." Then Jack noticed it, the glint. On her left hand, far too large for her finger, was a ruby ring, crimson and old, its gold band secured with a loop of thread to keep it from slipping off. "Jack ring," he whispered, more to himself than. Emily glanced down. It was my mom's. Jack's pulse slowed to a crawl. Where did she get it? She never said, just that it was special. A promise from someone important. Her voice softened. She passed away last year. Jack's world tilted. He knew that ring. He'd given it to a girl when he was barely a teenager. A girl with bright eyes and a laugh like summer. A girl named Lily, from Sunshine Children's Home. But Lily had disappeared. The orphanage had been shut down weeks later, and he'd been told, lied to, that she'd died. "Do you mind if I see it?" Emily hesitated, then slid the ring off and handed it to him. The band was aged, the filigree still intact. Tiny vines curled around the ruby like tiny secrets. And there, on the inside, barely visible in the light, oh, Olivia Reynolds, his mother's initials. The ring had belonged to her. Jack had given it to Lily the day he swore he'd come back for her. And now it was here. With Emily. Jack stared at the child beside him, her ponytail messy, her jeans dusty, her face too calm for someone so young. "He said your mother passed last year," he said quietly. Emily nodded. "She was a nurse. Sarah Collins. She adopted me when I was a baby." Jack inhaled sharply. Sarah Collins, the name tugged at something. "Would you let me give you a ride home?" he asked suddenly. I'd feel better. After everything." Emily considered it, then nodded. "Okay, but I have to be home before dark. Uncle Matthew worries." As they drove down the winding roads, Jack glanced at her again and again. The resemblance was subtle, but it was there. Her eyes, the curve of her chin, the stubborn set to her mouth. They pulled up to a modest apartment building in Queens. Before she got out, she handed the ring. Jack hesitated before giving it to her. "This ring," he said, "it belonged to someone very special. I think there's a reason you have it." "I think so too," Emily replied. "My mom said it would help me find my way back someday. Maybe this is what she meant." He waved and ran in. Jack sat in the car long after she was gone, the fading sun painting the sky in shades of memory. He didn't know what had just happened, but he knew this. His path was he wasn't dead. Lily wasn't gone. And if Emily was who he thought she might be, everything was about to change. Chapter 2. The Ring. Jack Reynolds didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of his penthouse living room, the ruby ring on the glass coffee table in front of him, bathed in the cold glow of the city lights beyond. His tailored suit jacket was slung over a chair, his tie discarded, his thoughts spiraling. He hadn't held that ring in over 15 years, not since the summer he'd given it to a little girl in pigtails, a girl with bruises on her knees and dreams bigger than the orphanage gates. Lily Reynolds, his sister, but she'd been declared dead. An accident, a closure, a lie. Now the ring had surfaced again, on the hand of a girl named Emily Collins, a girl with his eyes, his mother's initials in gold around her finger. There were too many coincidences, and Jack Reynolds didn't believe in coincidences. By morning he was in his mother's old study, the one place in the penthouse that hadn't changed since her death. Everything still smelled like lavender and paper and silence. He opened the box hidden behind her worn leather books and pulled out the only photo he had of Lily. A faded Polaroid from Sunshine Children's Home. He was 14, she was 4, holding his hand in a sunlit courtyard, her cheeks dimpled with joy. He touched the edge of the photo. "Where did you go?" he whispered. "What did they do to you?" Across town, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, clutching her mother's old journal. The page she kept rereading was one she had fully understood before. Some promises are worth risking everything for. The papers are secure now. When she's old enough, she'll know where she came from. She'll find her way back. At the back of the journal was a small taped key. She used to think it was just something decorative. Now she wasn't so sure. Later that day, Jack found himself standing at the edge of Queens, in front of the modest apartment building he'd dropped Emily off at. He wasn't even sure what he planned to say. The door opened before he could knock. A man in his early 40s stood there, shoulders tense, eyes wary. He looked like he'd worked hard every day of his life. "Can I help you?" the man asked. "I'm looking for Emily Collins," Jack said, straightening slightly. "I met her yesterday. She helped me with my car." The man didn't smile. "And you are?" "Jack Reynolds. I believe may I share some history?" The man's eyes narrowed. Matthew Collins, her uncle. The name confirmed it. Sarah Collins had been her mother, which meant she was the woman who'd disappeared with Lily all those years ago. "Come in," Matthew said after a long pause. "But I hope you're not here to make trouble. That girl's been through enough." Jack stepped inside. The apartment was clean but worn. Photographs lined the walls. Emily in grade school. Emily in a Halloween costume. Emily and a woman with warm eyes and tired shoulders. Sarah Collins. "I need to ask about Sarah," Jack said quietly once they were seated. "And Sunshine Children's Home." Matthew flinched. She didn't talk about that place much, just that it closed down and she adopted Emily right after. Said it was complicated. "Did she ever mention Legandisu?" Matthew nodded. "That old ruby thing? Emily wears it every day. Says it was the one thing her mom made her promise to keep." Jack felt something break loose in his chest. "I gave that ring to someone, a little girl named Lily. She was my sister." Matthew's breath caught. "I think Emily is Lily." Silos. Then Matthew got up and returned with a small envelope. "After Sarah died, Emily found this. She never opened it. Said she'd know when it was time." Jack took it with trembling fingers. It was addressed to Emily, "When you find your way back," in Sarah's neat, slanted handwriting. He looked at Matthew. "May I?" Matthew nodded. Inside was a letter. Name, Ellie Elizabeth Reynolds. Mother, Olivia Reynolds. Father, Richard Jack's heart thundered. It was real. It was real. That night, Emily sat at the kitchen table while Jack read her mother's letter aloud. Sarah had overheard a conversation at Sunshine Children's Home, something about preparation and replacement. She didn't know the full plan, but she knew enough to run. She faked an adoption record, faked her resignation, and took Lily far from anyone who might use her. "I didn't steal her," Sarah wrote. "I saved her." Emily looked up at Jack. "You my brother?" Jack nodded, tears burning behind his eyes. "I think I've always been looking for you." Emily didn't cry. He simply reached out and held his hand, like she had all those years ago, in the photo. But across the city, in a skyscraper of marble and steel, Richard Reynolds stood in his corner office, watching the skyline darken. His assistant entered. "Sir, your son visited Queens today, with a girl." Richikawi didn't turn. "Find out who she is," he said coldly, "and what she knows." Back in Queens, Jack pulled something from his jacket. A small box. Inside was the photograph, the one from the orphanage. "Emily." "That's me," she whispered. "That's us." Jack nodded. "They told me you died, but I always wondered." He handed her the photo. She held it like something sacred. "Uncle Matthew," she asked softly, "can I go with Jack tomorrow? He wants to show me where we were born." Matthew didn't answer right away. He nodded. "If this is who you are, Emily, then it's time you knew. Japeth are the mother who never stopped looking." The air in Manhattan was sharp the next morning, the kind of cold that made even billionaires walk faster. Jack stood outside the Plaza Hotel, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding tightly to Emily's. Her fingers were small but firm, like she was holding on to something bigger than him, maybe hope. They stepped through the gold-trimmed revolving doors and into the hushed grandeur of the hotel lobby. "I thought we were going to see where I was born," Emily said quietly, glancing up at him. "We are," Jack said. "But there's someone you should meet first." A woman was waiting in the tea room, alone at a corner table, dressed in muted grays, her coat still buttoned even though she was inside, her gloves worn at the edges, her eyes scanning the doors every few seconds. "Olivia Reynolds." Jack's mother. Emily didn't recognize her. But Olivia froze the moment she saw the girl. Jack saw it the moment the world caught up to her. "Mom," he said, approaching. "This is Emily." Olivia stood, her hands trembling. "Emily?" Emily stepped forward. "I'm your mother," Olivia whispered, voice cracking on the word. There was no explosion, no tears, no dramatic reunion like in the movies. Just the three of them sitting down. And until Olivia spoke again. "I never stopped looking," she said. "Not for a single day." Emily blinked. "Why didn't you find me?" "Because I was told you were dead," Olivia whispered. "Richard, your father told me. I lost one of the twins in childbirth. They gave me a funeral, a certificate, a tiny headstone with no body in the casket." He looked at Jack. "He let me grieve a lot." Jack nodded. "He told me Lily was adopted out to another family. And then, God." Olivia's hands gripped the teacup like it might anchor her. "I hired investigators," she said. "I followed every rumor, every whisper of a girl with a ruby ring. I made donations to orphanages I thought might hold clues." "You kept the other ring," Emily said. Olivia's eyes widened. "You noticed?" Emily nodded. "It's the same, just smaller." "I had two made," Olivia explained, "one for each of my daughters. I gave one to Jack to give Lily the day she left Sunshine." Jack looked between them. "You knew?" "Eventually," Olivia said, her voice low. "But I was powerless. Richard had eyes everywhere. I couldn't risk him finding you again." Emily asked the question that had been buried deep inside her for years. "Why would he do that? Why would my own father hide me?" Olivia hesitated. "Because you were part of something he couldn't control." That afternoon they drove to the Sunshine property. Where the orphanage had once stood was now a construction site. Reynolds Development was building Sunshine Plaza, a glitzy multi-use complex meant to revitalize the neighborhood. Jack parked just outside the chain-link fence. "This is where it was," he said softly. "Your first home." Emily got out, walked up to the edge of the fence. "Who was it?" "Before he closed it," Jack said. "Before he had all the files destroyed, all the kids scattered." Olivia knelt beside Emily. "You were born not far from here, at St. Luke's. I was in labor for 22 hours, and I remember thinking, the moment I held you and your sister, nothing else would ever matter again." Emily turned to her. Olivia's breath caught. "She didn't make it. That's what they told me. I never saw her. They sedated me. When I woke, they said she was gone." Jack frowned. "But if they lied about Lily?" "Exactly," Olivia said. "I don't know what's true anymore." Emily stared at the rubble beyond the fence. "What if she's still out there?" she whispered. That night, back at the penthouse, Jack couldn't. He stood on the balcony overlooking the city and held the old Polaroid again. Then he opened the drawer he never touched. Inside were adoption records, birth certificates, hospital files, all the fragments Olivia had hidden from Richard, all the things she'd collected in secret, and a letter. "To my daughter, wherever she is." Jack read the first line and stopped. He'd read it before, years ago, when he was 17 and had stumbled on Olivia crying in the study. He hadn't understood then. He did now. Meanwhile, Emily sat on the guest bed, flipping through her mother Sarah's diary again. He found an entry she hadn't noticed before. The man in the photographs, the one Richard whispered about when he thought I wasn't listening. He called him the contingency, said if Jack ever failed, they'd still have Lily. Emily's chest tightened. He turned to the last page of the diary. Taped there was a photograph. Not of her. Of a baby girl. A twin. With her out. Elizabeth, if she's alive, she's the kid. The next morning, Olivia made a call. "Richard," she said, voice cold. "I want to see you." At his office, Richard leaned back in his leather chair. After all this time. Olivia didn't blink. "I want to talk about our daughters." His eyes narrowed. "What daughters?" Chapter 4. The Father Who Played God. Richard Reynolds had built his empire on power, precision, and the illusion of control. His office tower, like the man himself, stood tall above Manhattan, polished, fortified, cold. Olivia stepped out of the elevator into the marble-lined executive floor. Her heels clicked with every step as if punctuating a silent war. Richard stood at the window, arms crossed behind his back, the skyline glowing gold behind him. "You're early," he said without turning. "You're a coward," she replied flatly. That made him turn. So dramatic, Olivia. He walked past his desk and dropped a photograph on it, the one of Emily standing outside the ruins of Sunshine, the ruby ring glinting in the sun. He stared at it. "The ring," he said carefully. "It was buried." "No," Olivia snapped. "It wasn't. You lied. About Lily, about the funeral, about everything." Richard's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. "She's alive," Olivia continued, "and she found Jack." At that, something flickered in Richard's eyes. Not surprise, not anger. "You should have told me," Olivia said, softer now. "She was my child." "She was an insurance policy," Richard said, his voice sharp. "Nothing more." Olivia took a step back, her chest tightening. You used both of them." Richard stepped forward now, eyes steely. Jack was never enough. Too emotional, too soft. But with Lily, he stopped himself. There was potential. She could replace him, in time. "Replaced him?" Olivia whispered, horrified. "We were building an empire, Olivia. You don't run a dynasty on sentiment." Olivia reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive. "They was a good thing your empire was about to fall." He turned and left before he could respond. Jack stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, arms crossed behind his head, the same question looping in his mind. Why twins? Why hide Lily, lie about Elizabeth, and place each girl in isolation? The file Olivia had left on his desk earlier that day had one chilling phrase scrawled in the margin of a corporate memo. Of a Gemini succession control protocol. He couldn't ignore it. And so, the next morning, Jack walked into the Reynolds development server room with his security clearance and began digging. What he found made his skin go cold. Experimental placement reports. Cognitive benchmarking. Controlled variable tracking. Emily and Elizabeth hadn't just been hidden. They had been monitored. Tusky separated to prove something. The nature versus nurture debate, weaponized for inheritance control. His father hadn't just played God. He'd played scientist. Meanwhile, Emily and Olivia sat in the guest room, poring over old documents. Olivia was quiet, as Emily read aloud from Sarah's final letter. "If you're reading this, it means the truth has found you. You are not who the world thinks you are. And maybe that's a gift. But your life, Emily, was never an accident. You were chosen, trapped. But you can choose differently now. Love loudly, live honestly. That's how you win." Olivia touched her daughter's hair gently. "She saved you." Emily nodded. "She gave me everything, except the truth." "She gave you a new beginning," Olivia said. "The truth was always yours to find." Emily stared at the small photo of Elizabeth again, the twin she'd never met. "If she's out there, I want to find her." Later that day, Jack called a meeting at the penthouse. Matthew. When Victoria entered, she looked wary. "I got your message. You said this was about Emily?" Jack nodded, then turned on the screen behind him. "It was what our father did. He played surveillance footage, adoption records, genetic testing logs, a file labeled Reynolds succession tracking with 2 names highlighted. Jack Lily wrangled. Gasps echoed through the room. Emily covered her mouth. "He watched us?" Jack nodded. "And Elizabeth?" Olivia asked. The jacket clicked one last foul. Elizabeth Reynolds. But underneath a line stood out. "The 2 cryopreservation authorized. Location." "Arm up?" Matthew asked. "Reynolds Medical Research," Jack said. "A lab owned by one of the family's shell companies." "You think she's still alive?" Emily whispered. "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but I know this. Dad's not done. If he finds out we're working together." "He already knows," Olivia interrupted. It wouldn't turn to her. "I confronted him this morning. He didn't deny it, he just smiled." "That means he's plotting something," Victoria said. Jack nodded. "Which is why we need to move before he does." That night, Jack broke into his father's executive vault. He bypassed the biometric locks using Richard's fingerprint, which he'd lifted off a whiskey glass the last time they'd had dinner. Inside was a steel drawer marked Contingency Assets. Inside that, a folder labeled Gemini Phase 2. The file revealed that Elizabeth Reynolds' death certificate had been falsified. Instead, she had been adopted by a private family under NDA, the Huntingtons. Victorio's family, Jack's former in-laws. He sank into the leather chair, heart hammering. Elizabeth had been raised under Richard's watch after all, hidden in plain sight. The next morning, Jack met Victoria at a quiet cafe, far from the city. "I need to ask you something," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "This should be good. Your family, did your father ever mention adopting a child? A girl?" Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out an old photograph. A girl, maybe 11, with bright red hair and green eyes. "My sister Liz," Victoria said softly. "She disappeared when I was 20, moved away for school, then vanished." Jack stared. He looked just like Emily. "I think your sister was Elizabeth Reynolds," he said. "My twin." Victoria's hands trembled. "Richard made sure I never saw her again after I called off the engagement," she whispered. "He said she needed to be reprogrammed." "Where is she now?" "I don't know, but I can find out." Jack nodded, jaw tight. "We need to find her before he does." That night, as the city lights flickered below, Jack stood in Emily's doorway. He was holding the photograph of Elizabeth, her face unreadable. "We'll find her," he said quietly, "I promise." Emily looked up. "You found me." Jack knelt beside her. "And I won't lose you again." The two siblings sat in silence. Outside, storm clouds gathered. Inside, the war had already begun. Chapter 5. The Twin Hidden in Plain Sight. The rain came down in steady sheets, drumming against the windshield of Jack's black Range Rover as it coasted silently through the wooded back roads of upstate New York. In the passenger seat, Victoria Huntington clutched a sealed envelope. "She was here," she said softly. "My sister, for the past 3 years." Jack didn't take his eyes off the road. "You're sure?" "I'd bet my life on it." The letter she held bore the return address of Hollow Pines Wellness Retreat, a private rehabilitation center funded covertly by Randall's Medical Trust. The signature on the intake form was Elizabeth Huntington, but the birth date, the blood type, didn't match. They met at Emily. "Richard placed her there," Victoria said bitterly. "Told my family she needed time away." "Processing trauma," he said. "Now I know what that meant. Programming." Ujinzi taught Emily's twin, hidden, renamed, and possibly conditioned for something neither of them fully understood. As they arrived at the facility, the gravel crunched beneath the tires. Jack glanced in the rearview mirror. 2 SUVs, his team. He wasn't taking any chances. Inside the gates of Hollow Pines, the air felt too still, too clean. They were met by a middle-aged woman in a gray blazer. She introduced herself as Director Hemsley. "I'm afraid Elizabeth Huntington is no longer with us," she said, her voice clipped. "Where is she?" Jack asked, his tone cold. "Not at liberty to say." Jack's jaw flexed. "Try anyway." Director Hemsley offered a tight smile. "Mr. Reynolds, you of all people should understand privacy clauses. Elizabeth left the facility 6 weeks ago, of her own volition." Victoria stepped forward. "Do you have security footage?" "Destroyed," the woman replied coolly. "Go." Jack glanced around. The pristine hallways, the blank expressions of the staff. This wasn't a healing center. It was a vault. "Was she well when she left?" Victoria asked quietly. The director hesitated. "She was. Stable." Jack caught the pause. You were conditioning her, weren't you, he said, for succession. Or for something worse. MZ turned away. This meeting is over. But Jack wasn't done. As they exited the facility, one of his security team approached with a phone in hand. Cell. We pulled archived footage from a neighboring cell tower. Caught this 6 weeks ago. He handed Jack the phone. There, in grainy black and white, was a girl being escorted into a black van by two men in suits. She looked like Emily. She looked like Lily. He looked lost. And she was gone. Back in Manhattan, Emily sat on the couch beside Olivia, flipping through old family albums. Her hair was braided, a quiet habit she'd learned from Sarah. Did she like to read? Emily asked, referring to Elizabeth. Olivia smiled faintly. She loved it. She used to fall asleep with books on her face. She's like me, Emily whispered. Maybe not just like Olivia said, but connected. Emily traced a photo of Olivia holding two bundles in the hospital. I'd think I'd know her if I saw her. You will, Olivia promised. We'll find. That night, Jack paced his office. The files retrieved from the facility painted a bleak picture. Elizabeth had been enrolled under a false identity. Her therapies included memory suppression, behavioral redirection, and something called response conditioning. There were notes. Patient resists compliance during tests. Increased dosage kept. Jack's chest tightened. His sister hadn't just been hidden. It had broken, and Richard had overseen every step. Meanwhile, Richard Reynolds stood on the balcony of his private estate, watching the lights of the city flicker in the distance. His assistant approached, hesitant. They've discovered holopan. Richard dinked. Let them. And she is in place, he said. The final phase begins soon. At dawn, Victoria met Jack at his penthouse. I think I know where she went. She pulled up a map on her tablet. Elizabeth loved one place more than any other growing up. The lighthouse near Stony Cove. She used to draw it for hours. Jack studied the map. It's Exactly. She always said if she ran away, she'd go where the ocean could drown out everything else. Jack made the call. His team would sweep the area by nightfall. Hours later, on the rocky cliffs of Stony Cove, a cabin came into view. The door was ajar. And inside, sitting cross-legged by a cold fireplace, was a girl with red hair. Jack stepped forward. Elizabeth. He didn't answer at first. Then slowly she looked up. Her eyes met his. And she flinched. I know you, she said softly, but I don't know why. Jack's voice broke. I'm your brother. He blinked. Chapter 6. The Sister Who Forgot Her Name. The old lighthouse stood watch over the gray Atlantic, waves thrashing the cliffside with rhythmic violence. Inside the weather-beaten cabin nearby, time had slowed to a whisper. Jack stood still, barely breathing, as the girl across from him, his sister, studied his face. Like it was a memory. I know you, she said again, quieter this time. But I don't remember why. Because they took it from you, Jack said gently. Your name, your story, your family. The girl blinked slowly. My name is Elizabeth, I think. That's what they called me. Jack nodded. It's who you are, but it's not all you are. He took a cautious step forward and knelt, holding out a photograph, the one from the orphanage. 2 children. He got in. You were 4, and I was 14. We were at Sunshine together. Her eyes scanned the image. She stared at the little girl, at the little boy. Her fingers trembled as they reached for it, but she didn't touch. You remember something, she whispered. Music, laughter, and then nothing. Victoria stepped into the doorway behind them. They erased her, she said softly, conditioned her until she couldn't tell what was real. I'm real, Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. And you're not alone anymore. Elizabeth looked at him, uncertain. You say I'm your sister, but what if I'm not? What if this is just another story? Jack reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the second ruby ring, the one Olivia had kept for 18 years, identical to Emily's. He wore this when you were born, he said. You had the other half. Elizabeth stared at it. A tear slipped down her cheek unbidden. She touched her chest, where a thin necklace hid beneath her shirt. Jack watched as she pulled out a single thread, looped through a worn golden band, a missing stone in the center. "It broke," she said faintly, "a long time ago. I used to wear it when I was afraid." Jack placed the complete ring gently in her palm. "You don't have to be afraid anymore." Later that night they sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets and silence. Victoria brought hot tea, careful not to say too much. This wasn't a moment to explain, it was a moment to unfold. Elizabeth sat beside Jack, the photograph in her lap. "What did they separate us?" she asked at last. Jack sighed, "Because our father was a man who couldn't love anything he couldn't control." She looked down. "Did he love me?" "I don't know," Jack admitted, "but he didn't deserve you." "They were preparing you," he said, "to replace me, if I ever became inconvenient." Elizabeth shivered. "I don't want to be anyone's replacement." "You're not," Jack said firmly. "You're you, and you deserve a life that's yours." Back in the city, Emily sat with Olivia and Sarah on the couch, staring at the door. "Jack's tux had come in an hour ago. We found her. She's alive." "She's really my twin," Emily said, hugging her knees. "What if she doesn't like me?" Sarah smiled. "You were born of the same heart. That kind of bond doesn't break." But what if we're nothing alike?" Emily whispered. "What if she's not who I imagined?" Olivia reached over and gently turned Emily's ruby ring. "Then you love her anyway, just like we love you." The next day, Jack brought Elizabeth home. She stood frozen at the entrance to the penthouse, blinking at the glass walls, the skyline, the weight of a life she didn't recognize. "This was his world," she murmured. "No," Jack said. "It's ours now." Emily waited in the foyer, her hands clasped tightly. When their eyes met, everything went still. The same face. Two different lives. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Emily stepped forward and held out her hand. "I'm Emily," she said softly, "but my first name was Lily." Elucade nodded slowly. "I think I..." We reached for each other at the same time. A hesitant, mirrored movement. Over the following week, Elizabeth stayed at the penthouse with Emily, Olivia, and Jack. Slowly, memories began to emerge. The way Sarah used to braid her hair. The smell of old books. A lullaby Olivia had once hummed in the hospital, but the pain surfaced too. The injection. The dark room. The isolation. Jack called in specialists, not to diagnose but to deprogram. Not to break her down again, but to help her find her way back. He also prepared for the next step. Richard Reynolds still held the keys to every door they'd broken open, and he would fight to the end to keep them shut. In his estate, Richard stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his cufflinks. "They're all together now," his assistant reported, "the twins, Jack, Olivia." He didn't look surprised. "Begins. The final phase begins." "But sir..." "Release the files," Richard said calmly. "If they want the truth, we'll give it to them. But the data... let them drown in it." Later that evening, a USB arrived anonymously at every major news outlet in the city. Inside, a full data dump. Project Gemini. Sunshine Orphan Cook. Genetic succession experiments. Richard Reynolds had made his move, a preemptive leak, not to confess, but to control the narrative. Jack watched the headlines erupt. Reynolds' heir's sister returns from the dead. Secret genetic experiment tied to billionaire empire. Twins raised for power. The Reynolds scandal unfolds. He stood at the window, phone in hand, his voice flat. "Call the press. We do this our way. Tomorrow." Chapter 7: The reunion that shook the empire. The sun rose over Manhattan like a curtain lifting before a play no one was ready for. Inside the grand atrium of Reynolds Tower, a press conference podium stood. Jack adjusted his cuffs in the back room, standing tall in front of a mirror that once belonged to his father. His reflection didn't look like the boy who'd grown up under Richard Reynolds' rule. He looked like a man carrying the truth, and the risk that came with it. "You don't have to do this alone," Olivia said, stepping beside him. Not replied. "They're with me now." He turned toward the door where Emily and Elizabeth waited, the sisters dressed simply, each wearing their ruby rings, one thread-bound, one whole, the symbols of secrets and survival. Olivia walked them to the side of the stage, tears lining her lashes. "You both look like me when I was your age. God help the world." Jack stepped to the podium first. The lights flashed. The murmurs rose. He spoke with clarity. "My name is Jack Collins Reynolds. For years I was known as the heir to an empire built on success, wealth, and legacy. But what I didn't know, what none of you knew, was that legacy was built on lies." He paused as silence gripped the room. 15 years ago, a child named Lily Reynolds disappeared. The world was told she died. The truth is, she was hidden, taken from her family, raised under a false name, conditioned to become a replacement. He motioned to the side. "And now she's found her way home." Emily and Elizabeth stepped forward together, their presence like a living contradiction. Two girls with the same face, two fates rewritten. Gasps echoed. Cameras clicked like applause. "I introduce to you," Jack said, "Lily Elizabeth Reynolds and Elizabeth Grace Huntington, my sisters, and the victims of a system my father created." He paused, voice steel-edged. "And we're not hiding anymore." The news exploded. Social media lit up in seconds. Renault's twin trended globally. Project Gemini became a search term overnight. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, secret children, and a ruthless patriarch who'd orchestrated it all. But behind the attention was something else. Momentum. The beginning of justice. At the estate, Richard Reynolds watched the broadcast unfold in eerie calm. The room around him was empty, quiet. He turned to his aide. "Prepare the jet. We're not done." In the city, Emily and Elizabeth sat on a couch in the back lounge of Ryofuku Tower. Olivia handed them both cocoa like it was an ordinary day. "You were both so brave," she said. Elizabeth looked at the photos splashed across the news apps. "Do you think people will believe us?" "They already do," Jack replied, walking in. "But the truth won't end with a headline. We still have work to do." He laid a folder on the table. "There's more. Documents from RMR. Reynolds Medical Research. Notes about a final phase. Something scheduled around your 18th birthdays." Emily froze. "What kind of something?" "Not clear," Jack said. "But it involved travel, isolation, a full transfer of power." "They were still going to use us," Elizabeth whispered, "even after all this." "Not anymore," Olivier said firmly. That night, in a hotel conference room near the courthouse, Jack met with his legal team and a group of whistleblowers. Among them, Margaret Winters, the former director of Sunshine Orphanage. She sat across from Jack, older now, her face lined with guilt. "I tried to stop it," she said quietly, "but he owned everything. The board, the licensing authorities, the adoption agencies." "You oversaw the placement of my sisters," Jack said. Winters nodded. "But Sarah Collins, she saw what I couldn't. She saved Lily, and paid the price." "Then help us finish what she started," Jack said. "I will," Dr. Winters whispered. "Everything I know, every name, every cover-up. You'll have it." The next morning, Jack walked into a federal building with Emily, Elizabeth, and Olivia by his side. They handed over files. A full extent of Richard Reynolds' network, not just inside Reynolds Development, but across shell foundations, closed orphanages, and research labs. Agents listened. Record again, took notes. "You've built a hell of a case," one said, "but if he runs..." "Because he still thinks he's untouchable." 3 days later, Richard Reynolds arrived at his Manhattan tower, under a gray sky. As he exited his car, agents closed. "This is a mistake," he said smoothly. "I built this city." "You also broke the law," an agent replied, clapping cuffs on his wrists. "You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, unlawful experimentation, and child endangerment." As cameras rolled, Richard didn't struggle. He just stared into the lens and smiled. But his eyes were cold. In the weeks that followed, the world watched the fall of the Reynolds empire. Executives stepped down. Assets were frozen. Projects canceled. And court dates scheduled. But in the midst of the chaos, something new began. Jack, now legally changed to Jack Collins, stood in front of the Sunshine Memorial Center. What once was an orphanage of secrets now rose as a place of healing. Emily helped plan the youth mentorship programs. Elizabeth helped design the art therapy wing. Olivia served as the honorary director. And Victoria, no longer a Huntington in business but a fierce advocate, headed the foundation's fundraising efforts. One evening, as the center's first open house concluded, Jack stood on the rooftop garden with his sisters. "Do you think he regrets it?" Emily asked quietly. "He regrets losing control," Jack said. "Not what he did." Elizabeth looked out at the skyline. "But he lost it, and we're still here." Jack smiled, eyes warm. "We're more than here. We're together." The wind lifted gently, carrying the sound of laughter from below. The laughter of children, unburdened by the sins of someone else's legacy. Chapter 8. The Trial That Set Them Free. The courtroom smelled faintly of old paper, wood polish, and tension. Jack adjusted his tie for the 5th time, not because it was crooked, but because his chest felt too tight. The pressure wasn't just about the cameras outside or the rows of attorneys and federal agents now seated in the room. It was about the 3 people sitting behind him. Emily, Elizabeth, Olivia. This wasn't just a trial. It was the reckoning of a legacy built on control, silence, and carefully engineered lies. The case 2784. The United States v. Richard Ellison Reynolds, the bailiff called. The room hushed. But Richard Reynolds entered a tailored gray suit. No handcuffs, not today. Flanked by his defense team, he walked like he owned the floor beneath his feet. Jack didn't look at him. Emily gripped the charm on her necklace. Elizabeth sat upright, chin tilted in quiet defiance. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that Mr. Reynolds orchestrated a decades-long scheme of fraud, human rights violations, and unlawful experimentation involving minors, including his own children." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Richard didn't flinch. His gaze met Jack's, cold, sharp, unyielding, a silent warning. The first few days were buried in paperwork, contracts, falsified adoption records, shell corporations, and testimonies from former Reynolds development executives who had turned Casinta for immunity. But everything changed when the witness list revealed a name that silenced even the... It was a first to grasp. The woman who had once run Sunshine Children's Home walked to the stand with slow, heavy steps. Her hands trembled slightly as she raised them for the oath. "I swore to protect those children," she said, voice low. "Instead, I followed orders, and I watched as lives were moved like chess pieces." "Who gave those orders?" the prosecutor asked. "Richard." "And what were those orders?" "To separate, to reassign, to report behavioral data specifically for 2 children, twins." "Did you know they were his daughters?" Yes. And that was when the courtroom began to fracture. Outside, protesters held signs. "Children aren't experiments. Justice for Lily and Elizabeth." And the legacy of silence. News outlets couldn't keep up with the revelations. Each day brought something darker. Cryogenically stored tissue. Tracking chips buried in toddler medical reports. Handwritten notes from Richard with phrases like, "Subject beta shows higher emotional resilience. Reinforce obedience via isolation therapy." Olivia watched from the second row, her face a wall of calm, but her fingers never stopped twisting the silver band on her hand, the one Jack had given her the day they cut ties with the Reynolds name. On the 5th day, Emily took the stand. Jack had wanted to shield her, but she insisted. "My name is Emily Collins," she said clearly, "but that wasn't always my name. My birth name was Lily Elizabeth Reynolds. I was taken, hidden, and raised in fear of something I didn't understand. He held up the ruby ring. This was a gift, a promise. My brother gave it to me before they tore us apart. For years I didn't know who I was, but I knew something was missing. Richard never looked it up, but everyone else did. "You're not here for vengeance?" the judge asked gently. "No," Emily said, her voice shaking but sure. "I'm here so this never happens again." Then came Elizabeth. Her testimony was quiet. "I don't remember the first few years, but I remember the conditioning, the silence. I was punished for asking about my sister. I didn't even know I had one. I only had—" "What number?" Jack buried his face in his hands. Olivia cried silently, and still Richard sat unmoved. The defense tried to pivot, claiming Reynolds was protecting his children from public scrutiny, that his actions were driven by fear, not malice. "He is a builder," one attorney said, "a man who created systems to last generations." But their words fell hollow, especially when Jack finally took the stand. "I was 13 when I first met Lily," Jack said. "They told me she was a charity case, a foster child." He looked directly at his father now. "But she was my sister, and you never told me." He held up a faded Polaroid. Two children, holding hands, smiling like they believed the world was good. "I gave her this ring the day they took her away. I was just a kid, but I made a promise." Jack's voice cracked. "And I kept it." After 2 weeks of testimony, the court recessed for final arguments. Outside, the city waited. Richard sat alone in the holding room, still calm, still composed. The guard offered him. He declined. He didn't need comfort. He thought he needed control. It was slipping through his fingers. The verdict came on a gray Thursday morning. Emily sat between Olivia and Jack. Elizabeth held Sarah's journal in her lap, a talisman of everything they had endured. The judge's voice was steady. 1 counts of conspiracy, human rights violations, and unlawful experimentation. We find the defendant. The gabble echoed. Cameras flashed. The world exhaled. Richard closed his eyes, just for a second. The legacy he had tried to sculpt from flesh and fear was gone. What remained was truth. That night, back at the farmhouse upstate, Jack lit a small fire in the hearth, while Olivia made tea in the kitchen. Emily and Elizabeth curled up together on the couch, a blanket over their knees, their identical rings catching the firelight. "You did it, Emily," he whispered. "You stood up to him." Elizabeth looked down at her hands. "We all did." Jack joined them, holding a newspaper in his hand. "Recoils found guilty," rewritten by the children he tried to control. Below the headline was a photo of all 3 of them. Not posing. Just real. Together. Later that night, Jack stepped outside onto the porch. The stars were out, cold, clear. He felt a hand slide into his. "I thought I'd always be broken," she said quietly.
He looked down at her. "You're not broken, you're surviving." "And you?" she asked. "I'm learning what family means, finally." She smiled faintly. "We're free now." He nodded, pulling her into a quiet embrace. "No," he whispered, "we're home." Chapter
9. The Legacy They Chose to Build. 6 months had passed since the courtroom gavel fell and shattered Richard Reynolds' empire. But time moved differently when you were healing, when you were learning how to live beyond survival. The old Sunshine Children's Home had been reduced to dust. What once stood as a monument to silence and manipulation now buzzed with life. Steel beams rising into the sky, echoing with the clang of hammers and the laughter of volunteers. A new name would grace its gates. The Lily and Elizabeth Center for Hope. Jack stood on the newly poured concrete, clipboard in hand, wearing jeans for the first time in years. His hair was tousled, his sleeves rolled. Not a CEO, not a legacy heir. Just a man helping build something better. Emily approached from across the lot, paint smudged on her cheek, holding a box of curriculum binders. "Classrooms are taking shape," she said, setting the box down beside him. "Good," Jack replied, offering her a bottle of water. "We're ahead of schedule." Elizabeth joined them next, phone tucked under her arm. "The community art studio got approved," she said with a grin. "Local kids already signed up for fall workshops." Jack looked at his sisters, the girls who were never meant to survive, now leading a place that would give others a chance to thrive. "You two realize," he said, "you've become exactly the kind of people he was afraid of." "Good," Emily said. That afternoon, Olivia gave the press a tour of the site. She spoke with the calm grace of someone who'd weathered hurricanes and still knew how to plant flowers in the wreckage. "We are not erasing the past," she told the cameras. "We are honoring it by building something better from its ashes." When asked if her children would play a role, she smiled softly. "They already are." Later that evening, back at the farmhouse, the whole family gathered around the kitchen table. Olivia, Jack, Emily, Elizabeth, Sarah's brother Matthew, and even Victoria. Victoria had resigned from her father's hotel chain and launched a non-profit alongside Elizabeth, the New Start Fund, helping children transition out of institutional care with housing, therapy, and education support. "I never thought I'd be here," Victoria said, laughing over her tea. "Making spaghetti with my ex-fiance's sisters." "You're not the ex-fiancé anymore," Emily teased. "You're the cool aunt." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Since when do you assign titles?" "Since always, Emmy de Coy." Elizabeth smirked. "You're not wrong." Laughter spilled over the table, warm and unfiltered. Family not by design, by choice. As spring turned into summer, the center began to take form. The main building, modeled after a school and therapy hub, stood where the old orphanage once was. Its windows were large, open, its walls painted in sunlight shades. On the two young girls standing back to back, arms reaching skyward. One held a wrench, the other a paintbrush. Both wore rings on chains around their necks. No clock, no explanation, but everyone knew what it meant. Jack worked with city officials to restructure Reynolds Development into a trust. Profits rerouted to fund social programs, environmental repair, and mental health resources for adopted youth. He declined every board offer, every high payroll. Instead, he taught workshops on ethical entrepreneurship. He took Emily to career days, helped Elizabeth host art therapy seminars. He called Olivia every morning, just to hear her voice. The legacy he inherited had nearly broken them. But the legacy they were building? It was setting people free. One Sunday morning, Elizabeth stood in the memorial garden of the center, staring at the small glass case embedded in stone. Inside lay the ruby ring, the original one, thread still looped through the band. He added a slip of paper beside a handwritten line. It would never meant to be his legacy. We became our own. Behind her, Emily appeared with 2 mugs of tea. "You okay?" she asked. Elizabeth nodded. "I am now." "You think we'll ever stop being the Reynolds twins?" Elizabeth took a sip. "No, but I don't mind anymore, because now they know the truth." That night, Jack stood alone in the kitchen, looking through the window as the porch light flickered. Olivia joined him, 2 cups of cocoa in hand. "You ever miss it?" she asked. "The city? The power?" Jack shook his head. "I used to think I wanted the world. Turns out I just wanted to matter." "You always did," Olivia said, placing a hand over his heart. "Just not in the way your father told you." Jack leaned against the counter, his voice low. "You think he ever loved us?" "I think he wanted to, but his love came with chains." Jack looked toward the stars. "He broke." "Yes," Olivia whispered. "You did." 2 months later, at the center's ribbon-cutting ceremony, the crowd overflowed into the street. Former foster children, teachers, counselors, journalists, even a few former executives from Reynolds Development, people who'd resigned and come to offer support. Emily took the mic first. She wore a simple blue dress and the silver ring Jack had given her when they first reunited. "My name is Emily Collins," she said. but I also answer to Lily Reynolds. And today, I'm not standing here because of where I came from. I'm standing here because someone believed I could be more." She looked at her brother. And then I started believing it too. The peoples filled the air. Then Elizabeth stopped up. "My name is Elizabeth Reynolds," she said. "I was told I had no identity, no voice, no past. But I found it. I remembered it. And now I get to help others do the same." More applause. Louder. Sharper. Then Jack took the mic, the final speaker. "I used to think legacy meant power," he said, "but legacy is just the story people tell when you're gone. And today, thanks to these two brave young women, it's a story of redemption." He raised his hand toward the building. "This isn't a monument. It's a beginning." He paused. And beginnings belong to the ones brave enough to rewrite the ending. Chapter 10. The Goodbye That Wasn't the End. The night after the grand opening of the Lily and Elizabeth Center was unusually still. The laughter had faded, the speeches had been given, the ribbons cut. But for Jack, something remained unfinished, something he hadn't allowed himself to face. He stood alone in the back garden of the farmhouse, holding a letter in his hand. The paper was old, the handwriting familiar. Richard's. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a draft. It was a draft. Never sent, never sealed. "To my heirs, if you ever discover what I did, know this. I believed in legacy more than love, power more than peace, and in the end I lost both." Jack exhaled and folded it shut. Even in failure, his father had tried to define the ending. But Jack had chosen a different script. Inside the farmhouse, Olivia was tucking away photo albums while Emily and Elizabeth cleaned up the last of the celebration dishes. "I've never seen Jack cry," Emily said quietly, drying a glass. "He doesn't like to show what hurts," Elizabeth replied. "He holds it all in, like if he drops a single piece, he'll break." Emily nodded. "He did break. And we helped him rebuild." They shared a smile. Two girls who were once kept apart now moved like mirrors, not identical but deeply connected. "I'm going to miss this," Emily said suddenly. Elizabeth looked up. "What do you mean?" "I got the letter yesterday. I've been accepted to the Art and Engineering Prep School in D.C. Elizabeth's smile faltered, just for a second. "That's amazing. But it means leaving. This house, the center, you." Elizabeth walked over and hugged her. "You're not leaving, you're becoming." Emily pressed her forehead against her sister's. "What if everything changes?" Elizabeth whispered, "Then we find our way back, like we always do." Later that night, Emily found Jack on the porch swing, staring up at the stars. "I wanted to tell you first," she said, "about the school." Jack slowly, "DC." She nodded. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Are you scared?" "A little," she admitted, "but mostly excited." He looked down. "You were allowed to be both." He sat beside him, leaning into his shoulder. "I used to think I didn't belong anywhere," she said. "Then I met you." "You always belonged," Jack said, his voice barely audible. "I just had to find you." A week later, the farmhouse gathered to say goodbye. Not a tearful farewell, but a celebration. Olivia cooked Emily's favorite dinner, roasted chicken, biscuits, and lemon pie. Victoria brought a photo album filled with snapshots from the last year. Construction days, courtroom hugs, late-night game nights, and quiet moments by the lake. Matthew gave her a toolkit with her name engraved on the handle, a nod to the girl who fixed a billionaire's Mustang and unknowingly rewired a dynasty. Elizabeth handed her a small sketchbook with the words, "Write your own blueprints," etched on the cover. Jack simply placed a small silver ring into her palm. Not ruby, not heirloom. Just engraved with one phrase inside, "Always your brother." The morning Emily left, Jack drove her to the train station. They didn't talk much on the ride. Words weren't enough. When the train finally arrived, Emily hugged him tight. "I'll call you every Sunday." Jack nodded, jaw clenched. "Promise me something?" she asked. "Anything. Don't stop living just because I'm gone." He managed to smile. "Only if you promise to come home when you need to." He squeezed his hand. Then she was gone, waving from the window as the train disappeared around the bend. And just like that, the girl who once fixed his engine and unknowingly rewired his heart had stepped into her own future. Fall came quickly. Leaves burned amber and rust. The center expanded. Elizabeth began mentoring kids in trauma recovery through art. Victoria spoke at a national summit about adoption ethics. Jack was invited to speak at a Harvard lecture on rebuilding corporate systems around integrity, but declined. Instead, he stayed in New York, helping lead community-based development initiatives across the boroughs. He also started writing late at night. A book, a memoir, a confession, not about power, but about the moment when a little girl on the side of the road fixed a Mustang and opened a door that led straight back to a family he never knew he needed. One evening, Elizabeth found Jack sitting by the fire pit in the back garden, staring at the now silent house. "She's okay," Elizabeth said, sitting beside him. "Emily. She sent me a drawing yesterday. She's thriving." Jack nodded. "I know, but you miss..." Jack didn't reply. Elizabeth placed her head on his shoulder. "You let her go," she whispered, "but that wasn't goodbye." Jack closed his eyes. "No," he said. "It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The concrete... Jack stood alone in the community center garden, the wind stirring softly through the rose bushes and wind chimes. It was quiet now, long after the last child had gone home, after the volunteers had locked up, after the laughter faded into memory. He looked out over the place where an empire once buried secrets. It brimmed with second chances. In the memorial display, behind softly lit glass, the original ruby ring sat beside a photograph of two small children, a simple inscription beneath. "Legacy's not what we inherit, it's what we choose to leave behind." Jack exhaled, slow and steady. He'd let go of the anger, the guilt, even the questions he'd once demanded answers to, because the most important truth was already known. They survived. They healed. And in doing so, they gave others a place to begin. At the farmhouse that night, Olivia sat reading on the porch. Jack joined her with 2 cups of tea and no agenda. For once, there was no business to fix, no fire to put out, no name to protect. Just peace. "She called today," Olivia said. "Emily." Olivia smiled. She aced her presentation. Her professor said she's thinking like an architect already. Jack nodded, heartwarming. She always was building things. We got that from Sarah. "And the fight, Jack." Olivier looked at him. "We got that from..." Across the city, Elizabeth hosted her weekly art therapy circle. 6 children sat around her, smearing paint across canvases, telling stories they didn't know they'd held inside. Each color was a memory, each stroke a release. And somewhere in the middle of it all, Elizabeth smiled. The girl who once forgot her name had found her purpose. Not as someone's heir, but as herself. That night, Jack finished the final page of his book. He titled it, "The Girl with the Ruby Ring," and beneath he wrote a single line. "Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the courage to love again. Not all stories end the way we expect. Sometimes, the goodbye we feared most becomes the beginning of something we never dared to hope for. Sometimes the family we lose is waiting to be found again. And sometimes, when we believe we are broken beyond repair, love shows up in the form of a child on a quiet road, holding a wrench and wearing a ring that once meant everything. Because healing doesn't come from forgetting the past. It would come from choosing a better future. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you of a family you lost, a truth you had to fight for, or a promise you're still holding on to, share it with a sister who's always had your back, with a brother you once thought you lost, with the person who reminded you, because sometimes the only thing more powerful than the truth is the choice to love again even after everything. Comment below. Have you ever been reunited with someone you thought was gone from your life forever? And remember, legacy isn't what we're given, it's what we choose to leave behind. Let's build something worth remembering,